thank you everyone. Good evening. I'm Alderman Tom Oldenburg, and we will call to order the Reduction of Red Tape Special Committee. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Narayan.
Here.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velazquez.
Present.
Alderwoman Sanye. Chair Oldenburg.
Present.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderwoman Sanye. We have 4 present. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I just first want to start off with some sequencing here and some housekeeping of how we envision the committee hearing going this evening. First, I want to thank everybody for coming, members of the public, anyone who's a business owner as well here. I want to thank city staff, Excise Commissioner Miles McDonald, Deputy Chief of Staff Sarah Baker from the Mayor's Office is also present. We will be hearing from them. I want to thank the committee members for making time on an evening. I also want to thank our host, Cortex, and the Cambridge Innovation Center for allowing space. I was just joking around up here with my fellow committee members. It's always good to get out into the community to have a continued public hearing on this important issue. So we had a Zoom online or virtual hearing, and we're having a live one out in the innovation corridor that is St. Louis, the sort of the heart of entrepreneurism. So that symbolism is intentional. I also want to thank the staff, Tracy, Joe, Mr. Clerk in the back, Andy. I want to thank St. Louis Communications team for all being here. I know that off-site locations create obstacles for you guys. You do a great job, and I appreciate you getting here early and setting up to entertain us in this venue. So without further ado, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from Wednesday, August 23rd.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Narayan.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velazquez.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Chair Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Spencer. Alderwoman Keys. We have 5 aye votes.
Perfect. Minutes are approved. We have one item on the agenda, and that is Board Bill 60. Again, the intention tonight is to hear quickly the broad strokes of the bill from the sponsor. And then I think it was important to this committee and the public at large that we hear from the Excise Commissioner and his department. And then the committee members can certainly ask the Excise Commissioner or Ms. Baker any questions from sort of technical blocking and tackling with the city. And then we will hear from the public. Everyone will receive 3 minutes to give testimony on Board Bill 60. So without further ado, Alderman Narayan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Oldenburg and members of the committee. We've discussed Board Bill 60 now internally in quite some depth, so I don't think I need to remind everyone what the one agenda item is here today. What this bill intends to do is to streamline the process for restaurants to get liquor licensing in the city of St. Louis. It does not change anything for nightclubs, does not change anything for packaged liquor stores. We've really narrowly tailored what a restaurant is. It comes in at a business under 5,000 square feet that does the majority of its sales in food. I don't want to continue beating the dead horse up here. This bill also gives the commissioner a little bit more power to police bad actors, not only in the restaurant space, but also with those nightclubs and packaged liquor stores. It gives him what we're calling a cooling off period, which is a brief 48 to 72 hour period in which at his discretion, he can suspend the license of any rogue actor with a liquor license. And with that, I will turn it over to the committee if they have any questions for me Commissioner McDonald or Ms. Baker.
Let's just do this. If there's any specific questions for the sponsor from committee members, just let us know right now. Anybody? If not, we'll have Mr. McDonald come up, and then I know there'll be some questions for the excise commissioner. Sponsor, are you okay with that? Great.
That
Any
works for me.
questions? Miles,
All right, thank you.
please just introduce yourself at the. Do you mind going to the microphone, Miles?
Mr. McDonald?
We go to the microphone behind you there. Thank you, sir.
Okay, my name is Miles McDonald. I'm the Excise Commissioner for the City of St. Louis.
You might need to move a little closer. I'm sorry.
You're gonna have to stick behind here.
Okay,
Is it okay to lower that?
yeah, that's fine. Okay, my name is Miles McDonald. I'm the Excise Commissioner for the City of St. Louis. I've been there in my sixth year. This has been a problem for some time, and I think the way it's tailored right now, to limit it to people that are trying to get a restaurant license rather than just everybody right out of the box. I think that's a good idea. I've read this over, and I think it's a very well put together bill. And I'm here to entertain any questions anyone has.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I'm just going to go through order as vice chair and then in order of seniority, committee members. Any questions you might have for Mr. McDonald? So, Alderwoman Velasquez.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner McDonald. I think I'm just going to get ahead of it because I think the public is going to want to know. What we heard a lot was how the changes in this legislation may affect neighborhoods. Do you have any, based on just concerns that we've heard?
Honestly, Alderwoman, I don't have any trepidations about how it's going to affect the neighborhoods. A bad place is a bad place. And we've experienced in recent years where people cannot get the signatures and they just go ahead and open up anyway and operate as a full bar. It's not a wholesale situation, but there's enough of them around where it's become somewhat of an issue with us. And there's some solutions to that. This probably isn't the forum to identify that, but it encompasses the police department. They used to have a vice division with a liquor squad. And how this is set up is if you create problems, let's say an unlicensed place, the police could go by and issue a city court summons to the violator, and then they'd notify us and the on-duty building inspector who goes out and does an emergency condemnation. Then the place is closed, regardless of the circumstances. It's out of business. And that has worked pretty well for us. It's a pretty seamless operation. And we've been doing very well with the buildings division in that regard.
Great. I have no further questions.
Great. Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderwoman Spencer is absent. Skip over the sponsor. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner McDonald.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a quick question, just for reference.
Sure.
Have you spoken, or do you have any feedback from your employees in the excise division on how they feel about the changes that will come about through this legislation?
Yeah, I think there's some reluctance to it just because it's been around for so long is my thought on the matter. But as we talked about early on when this first happened, it's not really up to us. Whatever the Board of Aldermen passes as an ordinance and the mayor signs into law, that's what we will enforce on whatever the circumstances are.
Absolutely, I hear that a lot, but I think that we have a responsibility to make sure that we do our due diligence when we're passing this kind of legislation, especially if it would directly impact not just our constituencies and our neighborhoods, but the employees and your staff and yourself, right? And I know that you're here today speaking on behalf of it, but I just want to have as a reference and on the record because of some of the things that I hear, not just from my constituents, but from some people in the office as well, about their deep concerns with some of the changes in the legislation. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing from our constituency and hearing your responses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderwoman Sonier.
Thank you for being here today, Commissioner.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So my first question is similar to Alderwoman Velasquez, but I'll make it a little bit more specific.
I think there are some folks in the community that are concerned about the changes in the bill, specifically with the petition and plat process, that it will eliminate or negatively impact community input. Could you speak to that?
Yes, I don't think it'll negatively impact community input. We have something in place already. It's called a protest petition that people in the neighborhood can enact on their own if they're not happy with the place, regardless of how they got the license. And then it's similar to the petition process, in that whoever the petition representative is has to select either property owner category or the qualified tenants occupant category and get a minimum of 10 signatures in either category. At that time, it's deemed a valid protest and it moves on. But whatever group that they selected, they have to get a 51% majority of the signatures in that group on their protest petition, for the protest petition to succeed.
Okay, thank you. And my
Sure.
second question
All right.
is, just as commissioner and as observing how the department has worked, obviously, I think two goals of the legislation is number one, to make it easier for restaurants to open, but number two, to also make it easier to hold bad actors accountable.
Right.
Can you talk to us about, based on the legislation, and I know you said earlier that, what we pass
Right.
is what goes into law, but obviously we want to pass what's going to best work for all of us. So can you talk about what you anticipate this legislation, if you think it might cause any challenges for your office, or what you think it might solve for your office?
I think it is solid.
Commissioner McDonald, I'm sorry, can you just try to speak into the mic just so the folks at home
I
can?
think it'll work in the immediate, immediately if there's a problem. If there's a shooting or something like that where there's a perceived danger in the neighborhood, I think the ability to go in and shut the place down for a period of 48 to 72 hours without any type of a hearing, and then determine after that if they've actually done enough where they should move forward to a full hearing in terms of action against their liquor license.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Alderwoman. I'd have a question too, because I think the chorus of concerns that I continue to hear, and I know others also, Miles, is around the potential for a bait and switch. So
Yeah.
an operator comes in and applies that they're going to move so much revenue in food. Within 3 or 4 months, that entity and that operation grows into a traditional tavern, and there's peanuts or pretzels potentially as the only food,
Yeah.
and it's shots and drinks and more of a nightclub vibe or tavern as opposed to a family restaurant, so to speak. So I think the concern is just from a compliance end. How does this bill maybe
Well,
address that bait and
well,
switch
with-
concept?
With that, that's a good question, Alderman, because when I was with the state, we faced that when they in Missouri got the Sunday license and allowed them to sell packaged liquor on Sunday. That was a big moneymaker for people. But you had to have a restaurant bar license to qualify for that Sunday liquor license.
Right.
We had all kinds of issues there. People would, submit fraudulent food sales documents.
Right.
And I mean, I don't, that's something, but with the state, we dealt with it a little differently since we had an audit section in Jefferson City. You could bring them in. So if that starts to be a problem, we may well have to get some auditors or find out who in the city is qualified to do an audit like that.
Sure. In addition to an audit of the revenue and expenses, you could launch an investigation too, right? You could have folks go and check out the operations, and if all of a sudden there's no menu anymore, right? You could have an investigation
Right,
that's
yeah,
led
but
either by you all, your office, or the police
Right,
department, right?
but
Okay.
again, I think we already talked about that. You know the position we're in.
Right.
We only got, right now, we have 3 authorized investigators. We have
Yeah.
1. So, our hands are kind of tied.
Yep. Okay. That's good to know. Thank you. I have no further questions for the commissioner. Anyone else? Last questions for him? Otherwise, Commissioner, thank you so much for your time. If you don't mind, just in case there are additional questions for you from the committee members, maybe after we hear public testimony, I'd like to reserve some time for that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's get to the public. I mean, folks have shown up here on time, so let's get to the public testimony portion of the committee hearing. Madam Clerk, do you need a microphone probably down there so that you can call out the correct names?
I have
Okay.
in support Anthony M. Ellerson Jr.
Yes, ma'am.
Real quick, can we just have anyone who is going to testify real quick raise your hand, and let's just swear all members of the public in. Perfect. Do you all swear that the testimony you're going to give is the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth this evening? Excellent. Of course you do. That's great. Okay.
Mr. Ellerson, if you can
Come up to the microphone. This way the folks at home can hear you if you talk into the red microphone, sir.
Well,
Just give us your, you might want to adjust it up a little bit. Just give us your name again, and then you'll have 3 minutes to give testimony, sir.
my name is Anthony Marcel Ellerson Jr. My family used to be a small business owner in St. Louis, restaurant industry. More so, I had some questions because I want to find out more information about this. That's why I signed my name on the list. Okay. But I do know from speaking from experience of doing this, it is very hard for small businesses to be able to open a restaurant because the process gets dragged behind. If you have the commission that's behind forever, you got to sign lease and letters of intent. You have to get insurance. You have to start doing all of these things. And then if you can't get a liquor license, it kind of changes your plans. And you might be tens, $20s of $1,000s in because you're planning on getting a liquor license. It's very expensive to hire people like Mr. Kelly and other liquor people to try to do these things. And then it's also very discouraging when even professionals don't recommend it, and you get recommended, it makes you want to put your business in another location out of the city limits because it is so much red tape, being able to get a license and things like that. I do understand some of the concerns about restaurant and bars and stuff like that, but the difference between a restaurant and a bar is the difference between a restaurant and a bar. Those, like, you can set guidelines for things like that, but the time that nobody can get back and the time that you wait 6 months in planning, and if you buy, again, you're buying things, you got staff who are planning, you're trying to train for these things. And then when you can't get it because of, with a lot of these areas, and a lot of these areas in desirable places, you have a certain group of people who own properties in here, who might be buddy-buddy with each other, who don't want to sign your thing. So it's a lot of political red tape that you have to go through in this liquor license process. And again, restaurants enhance a lot of areas because the Loop is built off of restaurants. The Central West End is built off of restaurants. So those neighborhoods aren't complaining about restaurants having bars and things like that. It enhances the value of those places. That's why the Loop isn't the same as what it used to be, because after the trolley came, a lot of those businesses left. And you see the effect of not having restaurants in certain neighborhoods and things like that. And that is my 2 cents. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
I have Derek Langercat in opposition, if you'll go to the mic, please.
Hi, my name is Derek Langeneckert. I'm the managing partner of Alpha Brewing Company. We're a brewery that's located in Tower Grove neighborhood. We started 10 years ago on Washington Avenue. So we've gone through this process 3 times now, once on Washington Avenue, once in Tower Grove, and we're opening a second location in the Delmar Makers District up on Delmar. So I've done the Platinum petition 3 times, and I've had a lot of interaction with Miles here and Mr. Krayberg, the previous liquor commissioner. I guess one question I had, Miles, you said that you have 3 agents that are enforcement agents. Could you tell me how many licenses we have?
I believe there's probably about somewhere between 1,600 and 1,800.
So 1,600 and 1,800 licenses in the city. So the reason I wanted to talk with you guys is I think any changes to the current liquor license laws need to also be met with appropriate funding to fund the liquor division. We just got our city retail by drink license for the Delmar Makers District location. I remember the day I filed for that application. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and we got it sometime in May. So I know it takes a long time. I personally went and knocked on doors. I think it's important for the neighborhood consent because I met all my neighbors. They have my phone number. They had a bunch of questions like, where's your dumpster going to be? What are your hours of operations going to be? I think that's important. But at the same time, I think it's important that City Liquor get more funding. You know, when I'm going in there and they have 4 agents, they can't process your stuff in a good amount of time. They can't call the people on the petition. So I think just more and more enforcement. You know, the last time, I remember the last time that City Liquor came down to visit my bar too, and it was on opening day, April 10th of 2013. So they just don't have enough boots on the ground to actually enforce the rules as they are. And if we make the rules a little easier, that has to be accompanied with appropriate funding to have more agents out on the street, making sure that bad actors aren't being bad. And for instance, to the point of we self-report our food sales to City Liquor every time we reapply for our licenses. That seems a little dubious at best. You're trusting a bad actor to then be honest. That doesn't seem very logical to me. That's my 2 cents. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Joseph Kelly.
Appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I'll try not to repeat what I spoke about at a previous hearing. Thank you. Again, my name is Joe Kelly. We own a consulting firm that specializes in handling liquor license applications for clients. We handle probably about 100 applications a year, about half in the city of St. Louis and half in surrounding municipalities. So we have an intimate knowledge of the process and the details. Some concerns that I didn't address at the previous hearing was, again, defining a restaurant and bar to qualify to bypass the petition process. Yes, 51% or a majority of a majority of the gross sales from food that's prepared and consumed on the premises. However, the ordinance also states an establishment with a gross income of at least $200,000 from the sale of prepared food and meals consumed on the premises. So what you may be opening up the floodgate here is to not necessarily nightclubs, taverns, bars that don't necessarily qualify, but it's also opening it up to perhaps convenience stores that have that kitchen in the back. And I've talked to a number of convenience store, gas station owners, and they sell a lot of food that's prepared on the premises, easily this $200,000 a year. So anybody that has a convenience store, gas station that makes the pizzas, the hot dogs, or what have you, could essentially qualify for a, by the drink liquor license. But it's one concern, and maybe we could take a, or the committee can maybe take a closer look at redefining the qualifications to bypass this petition process. And again, just a further detail on that, defining the premises includes all of the building, including the lot and parcel. So essentially, if a guy buys a hot dog inside the convenience store and eats it on the parking lot, technically. One other concern that I have when it does come down to this petition, there's changing in the definition of a tenant in this petition process. What we have been doing is register voters, which we get a printout from the Board of Election. In this new ordinance, it'll open that up to not only the people that are registered to vote, but it seems like it opens it up to somebody that can kind of show up at this hearing with a utility bill and say, hey, I live here too, my vote should be counted. And the way I see that becoming a problem is, say there's 50 tenants and you end up getting 26, 27 signatures of registered voters. You walk into a hearing thinking, okay, I'm good. A couple of people show up and say, hey, I have an electric bill here. Now all of a sudden the pool increases. You no longer have the majority. You're blindsided at that hearing. That's something that could become problematic. One other thing, again, this is not kind of on the addressed in this proposed changes, but something I wanted to maybe. Oh, sorry. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
I have Celeste Bossmeyer.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, my name is Celeste Bossmeyer, and I want to thank you, Alderman Oldenburg, and the committee members for the opportunity to testify against Board Bill 60. I'm here actually representing the Central West End Association, and with me is our association president, Brian Flowers. While an advocate of this committee's objectives to streamline government and rid the city of unnecessary red tape, especially for those doing business in the city, I think you need to be ever so careful when proposing changes that could impact the safety and security of neighborhoods, as well as neighborhoods' quality of life. The Central West End is an area of the city where residents live in very close proximity to businesses, and therefore these businesses have a greater impact on these issues of safety and security, as well as quality of life. The sale of alcohol in our city is, as we all know, a privilege that is subject to certain standards. Neighborhood approval by a majority vote of those directly affected by the proposed business has been a reasonable condition in the issuance of all liquor licenses in the past. I understand that the changes proposed are to streamline what has become to some, and as many people will testify to here tonight, some difficult process. But let's just separate what is the difficult process and what needs to actually be streamlined. And despite good intentions, I believe this bill creates some significant loopholes and problems with enforcement. It creates this subcategory called restaurant bar, which would not have to go through plat and petition, and that takes away the rights of these residents that will be living in close proximity to these restaurant bars. And in creating this subcategory making it a much easier process, this will also create other enforcement problems. It has a potential for creating abuse and will be completely unenforceable once a business opens. In other words, these businesses could get a license posing as a restaurant and change business models once again, as we heard from others. These are also many other deficiencies in the bill that should be addressed. For instance, being able to relocate without neighborhood approval, being able to expand beyond the 5,000 square foot limit without approval. And importantly, the bill does not address the lack of staffing and resources by the Excise Commission to monitor and enforce the license, as we've just heard. Very few people are there to be able to actually enforce this process. The established process gives the applicant an opportunity to present their credentials to the community. As my former testifier said, that he got a chance to actually get to know the neighbors and find out what their concerns are, where the dumpster goes, where the hot oil thing goes, that thing that's just a mess, and how they're going to address these types of issues. I'm sorry, time? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bill Kistner.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Bill Kistner. I am an associate attorney with a law firm downtown, Kistner Hamilton, Elam and Martin. It's located on the 1400 block of North Broadway. So my firm is both a tenant and a property owner on that block. We also we represent Bill Hibden and Nancy Fox. They operate a business known as Hibden Hardwood that also operates out of the 1400 block of North Broadway, and there are residents on the block as well. So I'm here to speak in opposition to the bill on behalf of my firm and Bill Hibden and Nancy Fox and their business. Our opposition to the bill is really to the elimination of the plat and petition process for this new category of restaurant bar. Like some of the other folks who've testified, we are concerned that it may be somewhat easy to game that category for someone to fit into that category, even if later on in time they aren't really a good fit for it. But we have greater concern even if that category is able to be enforced in a reasonable manner. Our opposition largely stems from our experience with a problem bar that used to operate on the 1400 block of North Broadway. There was a biker bar there that had a liquor license. It was designated as a public nuisance by the city of St. Louis for years on end. It was a magnet for crime and bad activity in the neighborhood. at a incredibly detrimental effect on the neighborhood, and yet for years, the Excise Division failed to take any action to revoke its license, despite having the clear authority to do so under existing code and arguably even a mandate to do so under existing code. To make matters worse, at some point, this biker bar decided it wanted to expand its operations, and it was able to apply and obtain a license, a second liquor license. The Excise Division determined that it could do so without going through the Platinum petition process. And so they were able to get this second license despite being, labeled as a public nuisance by the city of St. Louis. And despite the fact that there was no authorization under the code to abandon the Platinum petition process for this expansion. So we had to take them to court. A court ordered that the license be revoked. And then once that happened, the applicant did not reapply because they knew that all of their neighbors would be opposed to an expansion of their operation. So what all of that teaches us is that the Excise Division currently does not use the enforcement tools that it has, and that the Platinum petition process is a critical tool for neighborhood input, and this bill erodes that tool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Kotraba Benia.
Good evening. I'm Matt Katraba. I represent the Boulevard Heights Neighborhood Improvement Association. We're in opposition to this bill, and for the simple reason that Platt petition part of it concerns most of the families and neighbors in our little area. We're a big part of the Ward 1 in the city, of course, and we want to voice our opposition, and I don't think that I can do it any more eloquently than the two that came before me, three that came before me. And just to tell you that Boulevard Neighborhood Improvement Association would rather not see this bill go through in its current form. I haven't heard the other problems with trying to get the biker bar out and things like that. But I know that we had a recent situation where one of our restaurants, or one of our prospective restaurants, went in, put $1 million into a building, worked on it for almost a year, and couldn't get his liquor license. I don't know why. We don't all know why. But of course, Boulevard Heights approached the city, and the city talked to us. And shortly thereafter, they got their liquor license. So there is some attention needed to bring some support for the Excise Division to get things passed quicker so that it's expedient and it's worth the business owners to try to open up a restaurant and bar to make their money, as we all try to do. That's all I have.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Matt O'Leary in opposition.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing from me again. I testified last time. The only reason I'm back in front of you is I've spent a bunch of time over the last couple of weeks thinking about alternative strategies. Obviously, this committee is trying to balance out the rights of restaurateurs, particularly minority and immigrant restaurateurs, to achieve success in having small businesses, as well as the safety of neighborhoods. I think that there are ways of achieving this balance that respect the neighborhood's rights, as well as the work of entrepreneurs. And I wanted to throw out a few. I've got 6 or 7 ideas. I have fairly vast experience, unfortunately, in the liquor licensing world in opposition to liquor licenses, and wanted to offer some thoughts. Number one, so this is an attempt to do a push and pull, support restaurateurs, but also protect neighborhoods. The first idea is for the former. And it's trying to build upon the concept of a restaurant bar. This only works if there is some type of objective standard in which we can verify food services, whether it's hours of operation, menus, food sales, state-reported sales. Other communities have figured this out. St. Charles, for instance, has enforced these types of things. If you can figure out how to ensure there's no workaround, I think the concept of a restaurant bar which inherently would not have the same negative impacts upon a neighborhood, is very viable. But that doesn't mean you need to throw out plat and petition. Maybe the concept is we eliminate tenants from eligible signers. Tenants, the people who live in apartments and condo dwellings, are the hardest people to get a hold of. I have, as a person who's gone through probably 15 protests, suffered from the same challenge of getting to tenants, getting into apartment buildings, getting their attention. I mean, frankly, apartment dwellers just aren't that engaged. They're just, not fully invested in the neighborhoods. It's a transient occupancy. But maybe they aren't part of the signature process. Maybe it's property owners and business owners. That could dramatically impact the ability to get a license through. And I suspect you could generate support from the communities on that. Another idea is lower application and renewal fees associated with restaurant bars, if you can establish that category. Also, New York's got a concept with temporary liquor licenses. Maybe if you're a restaurant bar applicant, you get a 6-month wine beer application or license until 10 o'clock for seated diners. Maybe that's the bridge that helps you get into business, honor your lease obligations, protect your family, and protect the community at the same time. But if you're going to make it easier to get a license, you also need to make sure it's easier to lose a license if you're a bad actor. So there are a variety of things that need to be done there. Number one, if you lie to get a license, you shouldn't hold that license. Club Rain is a classic example of someone who said, we're going to be a restaurant. No.
Sorry.
Just real quick, if you're a public nuisance, you also shouldn't hold a license. If the public nuisance properties team has determined that, that should be the end of it. Thank you.
If you send the clerk an outline or a written testimony, we do want to see that feedback and any ideas. That goes for everybody. If you email the clerk that, we can get that all into testimony.
Mr. Kenny, you will receive it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt.
Les Stearman spoke in opposition.
Chairman Oldenburg and members of the committee, my name is Les Sturman. For the last 18 years, I've lived downtown at 1121 Locust Street. And while I was unable to attend the last hearing, I did view the YouTube video from end to end, and I heard what I thought was some fairly substantial misinformation that was provided at the meeting. And while many of us downtown recognize that we need to address some of the issues surrounding liquor licenses, we shouldn't do so based on false information or false assumptions. First, the claim that Board Bill 60 confers on the Excise Commissioner significant new authority by authorizing for the very first time 72-hour suspension of liquor licenses, it just isn't correct. The existing ordinance already provides in a number of places for the excise commissioner to suspend licenses, something which is rarely, if ever, done. But for example, section 14.06.290 already empowers the excise commissioner in his sole discretion to suspend a license for up to 10 days for a whole variety of reasons. Board Bill 60 limits the authority to impose those suspensions to once every 90 days, constraining the commissioner's ability to address frequent and repeated violations of the ordinance. Proponents of the bill also suggest that it makes it easier for surrounding residents to petition to revoke a license by making the petition circle smaller. In fact, it does the opposite. The petition circle is expanded from a 350-foot radius to 500 feet, an increase of 104%. What's more, while the existing law limits signature rights to those on the first 3 floors of a multi-story building, Board Bill 60 eliminates that restriction. So it vastly increases the number of signatures required to sustain a successful protest, making it difficult, if not impossible, to protest. As many people noted at the previous hearing, there remains systemic racism in our society and in our community. However, it's both inaccurate and unfair to conclude that the difficulties for some people to obtain liquor licenses are a product of racial bias. I can only speak about downtown, but our neighborhood is one of the most diverse in the region. Majority of our residents are minorities. It's a fact that 5 out of the last 6 independent businesses that were granted liquor license downtown are owned by minorities. We welcome Black-owned businesses in our neighborhood as evidenced by their growing number. Understandably, given our experiences, we've become very wary of the representations made by liquor license applicants requiring due diligence on our part to determine whether owners will operate responsibly. We believe it's important to protect our neighborhood from the violence and disorder that we've experienced for the last few years, since the Excise Division has shown no inclination to do so.
It's time.
Thank you.
Bless you. Arnold Strickler, or Stricker, in opposition.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I'm going to begin by quoting from the Excise Division page on the City of St. Louis website. The mission of the Excise Division is to, quote, efficiently and expeditiously administer the liquor licensing process, collection of fees, and enforcement of the liquor ordinances and monitoring of liquor-related businesses as they affect the quality of life in the neighborhoods of the City of St. Louis. We want to ensure that all liquor licensees are more accountable to the neighborhoods in which they conduct business, unquote. Yet excise has not enforced licensees to be accountable to neighborhoods in which they conduct business, and that lack of enforcement has affected the quality of life in neighborhoods, which has pushed neighborhoods to become more involved in the process of getting a license and revoking a license. Excise clearly doesn't have the resources to perform its current role to fulfill its mission. Despite this, Board Bill 60 fundamentally alters the excise system to almost entirely remove neighborhoods from their role in safeguarding their communities and planning for their future, and instead puts almost 100% of the burden upon the Excise Division to determine who should get and or lose licenses. To diffuse concerns by neighborhoods that their power over liquor licenses is being eliminated, proponents of Board Bill 60 argue that the Excise Division will be given additional power to regulate liquor licensees and enforce the excise code. However, the Excise Division doesn't have that capacity to do its current job, let alone perform an expanded role envisioned by Board Bill 60. Board Bill 60 provides zero additional personnel or financial resources to the Excise Division for its vastly expanded role, and the Mayor's office also made it clear in a response to an email correspondence that it does not see any role for expanding staffing or resources. Specifically, Deputy Chief of Staff Baker wrote, "The current system is irrefutably in need of improvement. This cannot simply be accomplished by increasing staffing. The inequities in the current process should not be ignored and will also not be resolved by increased staffing." This position is highly problematic and in direct opposition to the position of some of the highest profile advocates for reform of the liquor license process. Danny Eichenhorst leads a large group of restaurant owners who have been champions in the media for the need for excise reform. However, she and her group sent correspondence to this body specifically indicated that they can't support Board Bill 60, in part because it does not, as a first step, mandate reform of the Excise Division related to enforcement of the excise laws and nuisance properties. She asked that no legislative changes be enacted until proper enforcement plans and staff are in place. If current staffing cannot meet the needs of the current ordinances, how will it meet expanded provisions listed in Board Bill 60 without additional resources? How will this affect the quality of life in the neighborhoods of the City of St. Louis, as stated in their mission? How will this impact the ability of excise to ensure that all liquor licensees are more accountable to the neighborhood in which they conduct business? We don't know how the current ordinances for the Excise Division actually function, as there are not enough resources to meet what the legislation asks of the staff. Provide the needed resources to the division to the extent it's able to meet and exceed reasonable timeframes of the existing ordinances and regulations before expansive requirements are placed upon them with no additional resources and our neighborhoods absorb the impact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James Dwyer, in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity. I do appreciate your coming out into the community to hear from all of us. I think the theme is well established tonight. I'm going to add to it just a little bit. I testified remotely when you held your hearing on August 23rd, and I'm going to give a copy of my testimony then to the clerk and ask that be entered into the record. I just want to emphasize one of the points I made in that testimony in August, and that had to do with the notion of if there is a plat and petition process in place, it gives not only the advocate or the applicant the opportunity to present his or her credentials to the community and to meet the community and to engage and perhaps encourage a more productive relationship, but it gives the community the opportunity to engage and question and discuss
potential concerns. I referred in my testimony to the notion of a good neighbor agreement, and we have entered into numerous such agreements in the Central West End over time. I'm going to give a copy of one that we just entered into recently with Brennan's new operation at 44 Maryland Plaza. And it was a negotiated arrangement in which we pointed out some concerns up front. The concerns were addressed, they were reduced to writing, and we have an agreement which presumably became a condition to the issuance of that liquor license. That was the intention. Without the plat and petition process, there would not be that opportunity to engage. And I think that the crux of that is expressed as follows. The purpose of this good neighbor agreement is to define guidelines and expectations intended to ensure peaceful coexistence by and among operators of commercial establishments and nearby residents in our mixed-use urban environment. The underlying premise is that it is the responsibility of all parties to recognize and respect the reasonable interests of others, to avoid creation of a public nuisance, and to contribute to maintaining a peaceful quality of life in the public realm. That responsibility can be particularly sensitive regarding the management of sound transmission. The following chapters of the City Code relate to that, and I recite numerous chapters, and I'll get to a summary. The relevant rules, regulations, and reasonable expectations regarding sound emanating from commercial establishments are clearly exerted above. It is presumed to be in the best interest of all concerned parties that those parameters be recognized and adhered to, and that conflict and controversy be avoided.
Thank you, Mr. Dwyer.
Thank you.
Greg Stobe or Stobie?
Yep.
In opposition?
Hi, my name's Greg Strobe. I live in the Central West End, very close to most of the businesses there. And I would like to add my voice to those who have testified previously in opposition to this bill. It seems to me that the primary issue here is the amount of time that it takes for someone to receive a license. I don't think disenfranchising the neighbors around the proposed establishment is a good way to do that. I think that the Excise Commissioner's office is clearly understaffed, and I believe that's where the committee should be concentrating their efforts, as opposed to eliminating feedback from the residents of the neighborhoods. I'm 100% in favor of the process being streamlined. I just don't think that eliminating neighborhood input is a good way to go about it. And I also don't believe that the Commissioner's office has the resources to enforce the new proposed ordinance. And so with that, thank you for letting me speak.
Paul Middlestott? In opposition?
Yes, in opposition. Thank you for coming out to our neighborhood. I'm here to address the issue of residential property values as they relate to proposed Bill 60. I'm a residential real estate broker with Coldwell Banker Realty here in St. Louis and a specialist in the Central West End market. I've sold hundreds of homes in the CWE over the past 40 years, and I've been a property owner in the Central West End for over 50 years. This neighborhood's unique in that individual homeowners and neighborhood businesses exist and prosper living side by side. This has been a delicate balance between the two entities, but it's worked. Real estate values are high on our residential streets, which intersect with Euclid Avenue with all its popular shops, restaurants, bars, and galleries. One of the most significant reasons for such stability in housing values has been the ability of our residents to obtain prior notice and signature approval for new and revised liquor license. This process has worked to prevent the intrusion of undesirable bars and undesirable restaurant operators. The key to stabilizing the value and tax basis of our residential properties has been the signature approval of people living within a 350-foot radius of the subject proposed serving establishment. Here's a case in point. I may as well skip this since you're using the timer. So anyway, I intervened with a restaurant that was applying for a license, could not get it. And we had a meeting with the commissioner, with the opponents, proponents. We put it all together with the restaurant proprietor being there, and it worked out. The restaurant's a success. This is a neighborhood process that will disappear if Board Bill 60 is not revised. If residents and homeowners have no recourse of being notified and signing an approval petition and perhaps holding discussions with a proposed restaurant, bar, liquor license holder, the surrounding residential properties will suffer. Home values will decrease and businesses will lose their customers. It's obvious that having a clear cooperation between businesses, neighborhood residents, and the city of St. Louis has resulted in our neighborhood with great success. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaTanya Wilson? LaToya. In support?
Good evening, everyone. My name is LaToya Wilson. I just wanted to come to you guys to speak and as a citizen, as a concerned citizen. When I look around the room and I think about the demographics of the city of St. Louis, the people in the room don't actually reflect the demographics. We don't have a diverse group of people who are testifying or giving input to this position. And I find it interesting and very concerning that now that we're talking Black and brown and minority businesses having access, we're talking bad partners and bad neighbors, and we're concerned about safety. So when I think about the city of St. Louis, I grew up here my whole life. And we had a lot of businesses. We had a lot of restaurants that we could go to for foods. But when you think about the demographics of the city of St. Louis, and when we think about the licenses and who holds liquor licenses, downtown and Central West End, are we talking, do those demographics reflect the demographics of the ethnicities in the city? And when we get even further into that, when we talk about petition and plat, if a minority group of people want to come get signatures in a neighborhood where there is a majority opposite of them, they're not going to get those signatures. I know people who have been trying to open businesses for the past 2 years. And so I say that I don't say that we have a solution, but when we're talking access and equitability, we're talking access. And no, it is not the responsibility of those individuals. The agencies and the bureaucracies have a job to do when it comes to safety, policing, licensing. If they're bad businesses, shut them down. But those should not be reasons not to give people access, because we aren't talking that same conversation for the businesses that already exist. So I find that very concerning and actually discriminatory, because that is what systemic racism and redlining looks like, when a neighborhood can keep undesirables and others out. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Brian Flowers? In opposition?
Good evening. Thank you all so much for this opportunity to speak, and thank you so much for hosting this in the Central West End. I'm Brian Flowers. I'm the president of the Central West End Association, and many of my comments echo what we've already heard. But the current established process gives the applicant an opportunity to present their credentials to the community, and the community with the opportunity to evaluate and weigh in on the merits and desirability of the proposed business. To reiterate what Mr. Dwyer said and others earlier, the process also allows for the negotiation of a good neighbor agreement, which I feel is very important. It can serve to identify concerns and address potential conflicts in advance and reduce those matters to a formal agreement that can establish ground rules for a successful relationship with the community. To eliminate that well-established practice, as proposed in Board Bill 60, in effect disenfranchises residential interest in favor of simplifying the process for the applicant. with the proposed suspension of the liquor license for violations for 72 hours is a good addition. My concern is the due process considerations, such as a suspension may be more legally difficult than as proposed. We have seen how often the 10-day suspension has been utilized. As we saw a few years ago with Rain, it was the problem properties unit in the city councilor's office that closed Rain, not the excise commission. In any consideration of the changing the liquor license process, this committee should consider streamlining the liquor license revocation process as well, so that it is easier to completely revoke the licenses of bad actors. As currently drafted, Board Bill 60 should not be passed out of the committee and should be replaced by a more targeted solution to the real issues and to the closing potential loopholes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jeff Winzerling? In opposition?
Hi, I'm Jeff Winzerling. I coordinate a little neighborhood association called Maryland Gaslight, just north of here on the other side of Lindell. And our group has not taken up this issue. We only know that there is talk of change. The details, I think, have been a little slow and dribbling out to us. We have not attempted to actually engage on it. But I can bring just one sense that the folks who've spoken ahead of me understand the details of this a lot more than I do, and have spoken to them very well. What I would suggest is that broadly, when I think about how we live as a city, that we all have the same interests, that we're all interested in having the trash picked up. We're all interested in traffic laws being enforced. We're all interested in schools that work and businesses that thrive. Liquor licensing is so local. Like the 350-foot radius actually matters. This is a situation where it's hyper local, and I think it's useful and valuable for the plat and petition process to remain, because it gives those folks who are most exposed. I mean, ultimately, a liquor license is you're giving a business the opportunity to invite people to come to a neighborhood, come to that specific location in large numbers, frequently at typically late in the day. And that alone is a unique enough phenomenon that I think it makes sense to have this hyper-local influence on what happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Danielle Langenecker? In opposition.
Thank you very much. I know we gave you some challenges on names tonight, so thank you. And thank you everyone for having us today to share comments. So I am Danielle Langenecker. I live in Tower Grove East. I'm also the Tower Grove East Neighborhood President, and I am a co-owner of Alpha Brewing Company as well. So have worked alongside and gone through process of not only reviewing opportunities that the neighborhood would like to have liquor licenses, but also participated in plat and petition myself, knocking on doors and meeting with neighbors. And so I think really when we take a look at what we want to do in a term of neighborhood input, it's vastly important, right? So we take a look at a lot of different things where we're asking our neighbors to provide input in our neighborhood association on a regular basis, and taking that voice out is going to be very impactful, especially with, as we talked about, some very small radius of impact. When we take a look at the layout of St. Louis, we are very fortunate to have a lot of mixed-use properties, a lot of restaurants and bars that are literally right next door, across the street, or maybe there's even apartments above it. And so in other cities where maybe this a change of removal of plat and petition have worked, that may be in areas where there's strip malls, where you have to go a block to get to the nearest residence. And so when we take a look at the impact that it can have on a neighbor literally right next door, not only from an initial petition, but also being able to move that without getting neighborhood input could be concerning for those situations. You may be moving from a strip mall into a neighborhood with folks living right above it, and without that input and discussion, I think as a person who has actually gone through the plat and petition process, it was very helpful for us to have questions and welcome those questions from our neighbors. Things like, where is your grease trap going to be? if you move this dumpster over here, that will impede my ability to get out of my parking spot, and that's going to create a problem for me as a resident who owns their home. There could be ways that we can take a look at supporting a plat and petition adjustment. So, for example, some challenges that we've had in the past were, maybe there is someone who lives out of the country, and it's almost impossible to get a hold of them. Maybe that's something that we consider reviewing. But just removing the neighborhood input, I think, would be a big disservice to this. The other piece, again, it's been shared several times tonight, making sure that excise has the tools they need to appropriately be able to enforce these liquor licenses, and also hold accountable those who choose to do a loophole potentially of saying, hey, I have 51% food and then I just do pretzels, right? So we want to make sure that we have the full complement of what's available. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public testimony.
Great. Again, I want to thank everyone who gave testimony, everyone who showed up here this evening. I will go through the committee one more time if there's any reactions or any statements they just want to mention based on the testimony that was given. So let's start with Vice Chair Velasquez. Nothing? Okay. Well, let's go to Alderwoman.
Thank you, everyone. For
Let's get it.
Dead battery. Hello. There we go. Battery's dead on this one.
All right. I want to thank everyone for their comments. I see that what I said was a great segue. So now maybe people might understand why I specifically asked our commissioner about his staff and if he had heard from his staff for those very reasons. I do have one question because when people mentioned resourcing them, and one of our tasks here is with the budget committee. Commissioner, have we fully funded your department?
Yeah, we got what we asked for.
Okay, so the resources in that sense are there. The employees, that's another thing, right? And that's with a lot of our departments. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're hiring. I'm sure they're hiring. The city of St. Louis has lifted the residency requirement. So if you listen or if someone's listening and they're interested in an employment in the excise division, clearly we have a need here, so they can reach out there. I will say that I have been on a publicly what was almost, I would call, a nightmare of a protest petition process. And so that is why I am adamant about keeping the power of our constituency basis, because my constituents that I represent in a Black neighborhood north of Delmar felt unheard. That process was manipulated, and they won in the end, but it wasn't through the excise division, and it wasn't through the process that are already in place, and it definitely wouldn't have been through taking more of the regulations out of that. It happened on its own. There's no other way to put it, but it was definitely through a fight. And so that's why I stand up here in solidarity with the communities, with the neighborhoods, with the constituencies, and with the business owners. I've actually helped support business owners as well to get their businesses open, during this. So it's not against that, but it's just about not taking any power in any of their, to the point of everybody talking about the resources out of the community. So I thank you all again for all coming out. I welcome all of these comments to be shared again through our clerk so that we can share them. I think that all of us up here have a responsibility to our constituency basis and what we hear from them. And again, from my constituency base, especially with what we went through just a year or so ago, we're dealing with one, and now we're dealing with two more of these instances. We want to make sure that the quality of life there is protected the best way we can. And with that being said, I think we do need to make sure that our commissioner is properly staffed up, because he does have the resources in-house to be able to do that. Thank you.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Same. I love full rooms like this. I think it's great whenever, folks are engaged and whenever we're having these conversations. And I think this room is really good because I think it's reflective of the various perspectives that are out there. And it creates an opportunity for us to hear everyone's experiences. So just thank you all for coming out. I mean, this is our jobs, but you all are choosing to engage in the process and give us feedback that we need to make good decisions. I actually had some questions connected to some of what we heard tonight, if that's okay. I guess my first question was around, I feel like a lot of testimony talked about the Excise Commission and not having enough enforcement power or ability to restrict liquor licenses. And I can say that shortly after I was elected as Alderwoman, I had some incidents within the 7th Ward connected to Cinco de Mayo, where I did find that it was difficult for it was difficult to figure out how to, like, a lot of folks in the community had identified this place as a nuisance business, had a lot of issues. There were some serious safety concerns, but it was very difficult to get it addressed. It ended up having to kind of go around. So I'm just curious, I know you said that you were fully funded and fully staffed, but is there something that we could do to empower your office to be able to?
There is, and there's a real misunderstanding. There's a real misunderstanding as to how the enforcement works. We don't have enough people to go out and do the enforcement, one. The second thing is they're not certified in any kind of law enforcement job. They're allowed to carry guns, but there's no provision to qualify them on firearms. And I think we all know where that's headed. If you shoot somebody and you've never qualified on the gun that you're shooting them with, that's a bad situation. And the ordinance specifically states that the enforcement of the liquor ordinance is within the purview of the police department. We'll give any kind of technical advice that they need, but that's why I was a big proponent on having them start some type of at least. They used to have a vice division where they had a morality squad, a gambling squad, and a liquor squad. Well, the morality squad, that's not going to fly anymore. But the liquor squad, I think, would be a big asset to the city of St. Louis in getting those liquor ordinances enforced by police officers that would develop some level of expertise in that. And we could certainly send people out with them if they would like, but they're the ones that would be there to make the physical arrest of the people. If I'm making sense what I'm saying here, and it's so we get a lot of splashback on that we're not doing anything, and they call us. We don't send people out. Our people have no authority to act on anything. All they can do is make a report of what they saw. And they could give them a ticket from us, a city court ticket, which would be like underage drinking, something like that, and they may or may not show up in court. That's kind of what happens, much like speeding tickets. Nobody's too impressed by it when I get one. So that's the situation we're in. We need more coordination with all of the agencies. Okay.
Thank you. My other question might be for Alderman Ryan. So a lot of folks talked about a concern about the self-report. Can you talk a little bit about how the bill will measure the food and liquor license ratio? And I know someone also mentioned convenience stores who may sell food and then account for those food sales as qualifying them to meet restaurant criteria.
So I want to be clear in my statements here. This bill was essentially a first bite at the apple. We always understood that we were going to be taking in significant feedback from the community. And I guess before I go any further, I do want to thank everyone, whether you agree with me on anything or not. I really do agree with you. I really do thank you for coming out and taking time out of your day to make sure that your voice is heard in this process. Because ultimately it's going to make for a better piece of legislation, or no changes at all. That may ultimately be what's best here, and that may be what this committee comes up to. but I believe Sarah Baker may be able to weigh in some on the specifics on how we are measuring those, and then some of the ongoing conversations regarding how we may be looking to change those things as well as we move forward in the next bite at the apple here.
So Alderwoman Sonia, correct me if I misunderstood your question because I thought Brett was going to answer it. So, but I think what you were asking about is how do we measure the food sales of an entity, right? So as Miles was suggesting earlier, food and liquor sales are self-reported, right? So we could employ some audit tactics to go into that in greater depth to get more information there. We also are committed to fully staffing up in the Excise Commission. So through the support of the Board of Aldermen, you all have actually increased their budget from $470,000 and change to over $714,000. We as an administration have been working on ways to better, even in the interim before passing this additional legislation or even prior to the last budget being implemented, we brought in police officers on limited duty to help us get through our excise backlog. We're trying to staff up. We're also using the expansion of the personnel services line within the excise budget to explore additional per performance employees so that we have greater flexibility and can bring people in to those positions quicker to be better able to do enforcement. I think one of the key components that this bill changes really is around enforcement. So giving that power to the excise commissioner to suspend for 42 to 72 hours, why that is new is it's an immediate power. There's not a hearing before that initial suspension. That's to address an issue like happened on Cinco de Mayo in your ward. If you, in addition to this, if you operate without a license, we're eliminating your ability to reapply for a license, or to apply for a license rather, for 3 years. If you lose your license, we're making it so that license is lost before reapplication for a year. All of those measures should help curtail bad actions in this area. I also want to speak a little bit to public input and how that's incorporated in the legislation. The legislation does eliminate the Platten petition for restaurants, but what it doesn't eliminate is public hearings. So just like today we're considering this legislation in front of a public hearing, that is still preserved in the legislation. There will still be a hearing on every single restaurant that is seeking a liquor license in the city of St. Louis. That hearing will have to be noticed up 15 days before it occurs and posted publicly in the neighborhood. Neighbors will be allowed to come to that hearing and offer testimony, and records of those hearings will be preserved and could be posted as well. In addition to that, should there be a revocation hearing, there's also the opportunity beyond the Platten protest petition that is still available in this area. There is the opportunity again for neighbors to be involved in that process and come and offer their concerns. And finally, I would say on the public input process, this bill explicitly includes CSB complaints in what Commissioner McDonald is considering. So as we have residents all around the community submitting requests through CSB, we're going to be looking very closely at those when we're considering the approval or denial of an initial application as well. So I just wanted to highlight that as some of the ways in which the legislation does support public input and the ways in which we are increasing enforcement to really add some teeth to this so that we can make sure that St. Louis is open to business, open to entrepreneurship, open to its diverse residents, but also that it has some enforcement elements to preserve and protect neighborhoods that may be facing some issues with restaurants, etc. If there are any other questions I can address, I'd be happy to.
Great. Well, we're done with public testimony for right now, Mr. O'Leary. I'm sorry, but I do want to give you a card, and I do want to address. I just want to conclude here with some upshots that we're really still just beginning. In the coming weeks, this committee is going to take the measured testimony from our August 23rd meeting, as well as this one. The sponsor behind closed doors and very publicly today has told me he's flexible. He wants to get to a bill that is workable and that is compromised. He's got meticulous notes up here, just in case anyone doesn't believe me, that I think he was in earnest taking to try to ensure that we hear from everybody, because there is a balance here that I think many people have testified to that we're trying to strike. I like the idea of detached officers, potentially a la the environmental investigation unit that the city has, or the trash task force, right? This is a unit that's dedicated to illegal dumping and all matters of illegality around trash and waste. So this model exists, and I think it can be resourced through the budget division, to the Board of Aldermen, through the support through the mayor's office. So I think that's a very important process to understand, that compliance and enforcing some of the ordinances that Miles and his department may not have been able to do in the past because of just constraints. So those are things that I think need to be embedded in this legislation as well. Not an after the fact thought, but compliance needs to be sort of part of this process. I also heard a good idea tonight that I think is worth looking into as well, which was the temporary license aspect. That can get entrepreneurs up and running right away, and we figure out how the gaps get filled in afterwards. I thought that was a good suggestion, and that's something I think this committee should look into. And there could potentially be continuances. I will also say I think it's important that we heard from a lot of neighborhood associations tonight. That was one of the important things I didn't think our first meeting had enough of. So I appreciate all the neighborhood association representatives and officers that came out tonight. Neighborhood associations are the backbone of this city. You folks contribute your time, your volunteers, your block captains, and your testimony does not fall on deaf ears. We appreciate that you came out tonight, and I know that as an elected official, I constantly am seeking the advice of those volunteers that contribute their time and with the shared goal of improving quality of life in the city and in their neighborhood. So I do want to thank that we heard from all the neighborhood associations this evening. I have nothing further other than I go to adjournment, but I didn't know if my vice chair had anything to add.
Just the update that we go back to our full board session this Friday. We don't have another committee meeting scheduled right now. That does not mean we won't schedule it. One of the things that we'll do is go back and communicate, as we publicly have to do, but I think a lot of us communicate with our communities and neighborhood associations when there will be a meeting next. So, and just one other, I guess I'll do the couple of housekeeping things. You can always submit testimony to us written. Alderman Oldenburg said it. You can email usually any one of us and CC the clerk, the BOA clerk at STL, whatever it is, /mo.gov. I'm going to get it wrong. But I typically forward all the testimony that you send to the clerk anyway, but we do that. So we'll be communicating with you regularly. We also have that QR code in the back. It's not necessarily about this bill, but just about places that you might see in the area of, government in St. Louis that we could cut some red tape.
Perfect. Awesome. With that, let's go to excused aldermen on our agenda. I have Alderwoman Spencer and Alderwoman Keys. I need a motion to excuse their absence, please.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Excused absences. With that, we will adjourn. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight. I appreciate it.